Should you install ISA server on a server that's a member of an Active Directory domain, or should it be on a workgroup? Well, that's the million-dollar question. Actually, if there was $1 million riding on that answer, I probably wouldn't win the money, since it's a really touchy subject, and for every person that says you should go a workgroup, there's someone else that'll tell you you should go with a domain. So in this video, we're going to talk about it, and at the end of the video, maybe one of them will be a clear winner, maybe not. But either way, it will give you some ammunition for discussion amongst your peers at work. So firstly, let's discuss a workgroup scenario. What are the advantages of a workgroup deployment, and what are the disadvantages? Now, the main advantage, or perhaps I should say the main perceived advantage of going with the workgroup model, is that if the firewall is somehow compromised, then the attacker probably won't have access to Active Directory. But I guess we could also argue that the reverse of that statement's true. What if they compromise Active Directory? Then if ISA's in a workgroup, then they won't have access to the ISA server. Well, who really cares, right? I mean, I can't imagine why any attacker that's managed to sneak into your network and has compromised Active Directory, why they could care less about owning your firewall. Now, for what it's worth, they could potentially be pulling data from your databases and all your other systems. I mean, who cares about the firewall, right? Let's be serious. So, what are the disadvantages of using a workgroup for our ISA server? Well, firstly, a workgroup scenario supports only one configuration storage server. And since all of the configuration and management tasks for your ISA server are done at your configuration storage server here, if you can't contact this server, then you can't change your ISA server configuration. Now, that's not much of a disadvantage if you only have one ISA server, but when you've got multiple array members, you have that single point of failure to contend with. Now, there's also no support for VPN user mapping from non-Windows clients. That's a feature of ISA Server 2006 that allows non-Windows clients to have their VPN credentials mapped to an Active Directory user account. Now, obviously, in a workgroup, there's no Active Directory, so this feature is not available. Now, you also can't use user certificate authentication in a workgroup scenario, and with the exception of web traffic, there's no support for user or group-based outbound access. But clearly, the number one reason for sticking with the workgroup model, and I say this tongue-in-cheek, is that by going with the workgroup model, you won't upset the apple cart and have all of those old-school security gurus that stop by and they inspect your handiwork. They'll have little to argue with, since it's the common contention that a workgroup is the more secure option. Remember, no one ever got fired for buying IBM. Well, they didn't 10 years ago, but today, can we say the same thing? The workgroup's more secure? Is it really? Well, I can think of two top ISA professionals, these are gurus on the subject, that don't share this view. They both suggest that the Active Directory domain model is the superior choice, and here's why. With a domain-based ISA server, you've got much more granular control over the traffic that goes in and comes out of the firewall. You can leverage the existing domain groups without having to create local ISA groups. Plus, you get to manage user and group-based access to protocols other than just the web ones. There's also full support for the firewall client, which of course, as we know from our previous videos, this allows encrypted communication to occur between our client and the firewall. And this client also allows you to log some really useful information about the users and the machines and the applications that are communicating with your firewall using any protocol. Another advantage is administrators can manage the ISA servers from any domain managed machine in the enterprise, which of course makes it more convenient to manage your ISA server. Plus, when we work with a domain model, we could also use management tools, things like MOM, We can use things like group policy and, of course, user certificate authentication. Now, it wouldn't be fair, though, if we didn't go over the disadvantages to a domain model, though. But in all honesty, I can really only think of one disadvantage. And that's this. If our firewall is somehow compromised, then Active Directory might also be compromised. Okay, well, that's true. It might. But then again, it might not. But if you believe the press, there hasn't been one single incident of any ISA server ever being compromised if it was properly configured in the first place. Therefore, if your firewall is compromised, it really doesn't matter if it's a domain member or not. So in this video, we've talked about whether it's better to install ISA server on a server that's a member of an Active Directory domain or on a server that's a member of a workgroup. Now, this is by no means a definitive list, and you'll probably be able to think of some other pros and cons to each side of the argument, and that's great if you can, because the main purpose of this video was really to highlight some concerns that people out there on the internet have and bring them out into the open, onto the table, so we can discuss them so you can make a more informed decision about your own deployment. The fact is, though, if you don't configure ISA server properly, then it really doesn't matter which deployment choice you've decided to make. Now, at the end of the day, if you still don't know what to do and you have to choose one based on our recommendations, then I'd go with the domain model, and that's what we'll be doing in these videos. But that's what makes this industry great, the agony of choice. So we hope you've enjoyed this video, and we'd like to thank you for watching.